Many people believe we are on the brink of World War III. Now, the idea of World War III has been around, obviously, since the Second World War. And as the decades go on, it seems as though people believe we're increasingly getting closer to that unfortunate stage. Now, many disagree with that as well, and a lot of people believe cooler heads will prevail, and let's hope they do. But today I want to speak to you about a spiritual practice for avoiding World War III. And if you're one of my esteemed audience, you probably know this spiritual teaching very well, but if you're new to my channel, you will not know this spiritual teaching. Now, this spiritual teaching comes from Taoism and is called Wu Wei. Now, Wu Wei can be translated in many different ways: effortless action, effortless living, non-doing, intelligent spontaneity, and also non-interference. Now, in my book, Effortless Living, there's actually a quote from the great Trappist monk Thomas Merton from his book, The Way of Zhuangzi, kind of his loose translation of the Zhuangzi. And I'll just read this quote to you, which kind of gives you a good, concise idea of what Wu Wei is. The true character of Wu Wei is not mere inactivity, but perfect action, because it is act without activity. In other words, it is action not carried out independently of heaven and earth, and in conflict with dynamism of the whole, but in perfect harmony with the whole. It is not mere passivity, but it is action that seems both effortless and spontaneous, because performed rightly, in perfect accordance with our nature and with our place in the scheme of things. It is completely free because there is in it no force and no violence. It is not conditioned or limited by our own individual needs and desires, or even by our own theories and ideas. This is an amazing quote from Thomas Merton on the nature of Wu Wei. Now, as Thomas was mentioning there, it speaks a lot about right action as well, right? And so part of Wu Wei and part of Taoism in general is about having a mind of no deliberation, where you act immediately and appropriately to each and every situation. This is the art of spontaneity, right? And so you want to get to that stage on a conscious level where you can act immediately and appropriately to each and every situation. Now, sometimes you have to act immediately and appropriately in a way that may be to defend yourself or so forth and so on, right? It's not like a strict rule of how you should act in the world. We all know that surely by now. But for ourselves on a personal level, we will act according to whatever is happening to us in the terrain of our own personal life, right? And so the art of Wu Wei is about calibrating your life in harmony with the all, right? And now that's on an individual level, but we can also take that onto a nationalistic level, right? Where nations can govern themselves with Wu Wei, and so they too can act immediately and appropriately to each and every situation, but they have to harness the essence of what Wu Wei is. As I said, part of the essence of Wu Wei is non-interference, right? The path of non-interference. Now, to speak about that a little bit more, I will go back to my book, Effortless Living, and give you a quote from Zhuangzi, out of the Zhuangzi text, one of the great Taoist sages, Zhuangzi. And just so you can get an idea of why we should allow things to be and just leave things alone and not look over the fence or try and tell people how to live and how to be. I have heard of letting the world be, of leaving it alone. I have never heard of governing the world. You let it be for fear of corrupting the inborn nature of the world. You leave it alone for fear of distracting the virtue of the world. If the nature of the world is not corrupted, if the virtue of the world is not distracted, why should there be any governing of the world? So Zhuangzi's quote here kind of encapsulates the entire teachings of Taoism in general, right? If we leave the world alone, if we allow the natures of people and countries and so forth and so on to run their course without interference, that's the way of the Tao. You're allowing things to play out and manifest in accord with how they should without you interfering. First of all, why do we interfere, right? We feel like we know the way and our way is right from a subjective perspective. And so we kind of superimpose that onto other people. That's part of the big problem, right? In Sanskrit, that's called Maya, the illusion of measurement, where we begin to tell people how to live and how to be because we've measured reality according to our own conditioning and the way that we see the world, right? Our own indoctrination. And so we superimpose that onto a reality that's just natural and just the way it is. And we think that we know the way and we know what's best for others. And so this is the main point of why World War III itself would even take place. This is why conflict takes place in general, right? As Zhuangzi is alluding to. This is the seed of all conflict. Think about if you're going to interfere with your neighbor's life, right? You're going to start telling them how to think and how to be, or say if you start mowing their lawn, it'd be very strange, right? Even though you might be doing them something of a service, they didn't ask you to mow their lawn. But you just start mowing their lawn, they feel uncomfortable, you cause some sort of animosity and conflict, even in some sense when you're trying to help others, right? And so that's a big problem in the world where we think we're helping others, we're actually not helping others. Like I said, go and start mowing your neighbor's lawn, see what they think. They might be grateful, yeah, first time around. Second time around might be a bit strange. The third time is complete awkward. Right? And so that's what we have in the world. We have countries who are trying to always intervene with other people's lives, other countries' lives, and it becomes awkward after a certain amount of time. And then that can turn into animosity, that can turn into a much greater conflict going forward. And so that's what we see all around the world. And that's basically what's happening in the modern day. And that's actually what's always been happening. It's just that things get ramped up a little bit. Right? Particularly when we have social media and we have all these people acting like that these things haven't happened before. You know, people on social media are acting like as if war hasn't happened before. And it's like, newsflash, wars have happened all throughout history. Just because you have your silly smartphone and your social media apps, they're not new, right? War has always happened. So we need to reorient our awareness back to this spiritual practice. And so in using the yard analogy, like I said, mowing the neighbor's lawn and interfering with their own lives and this and that, if you take care of your own family, your own yard, your own home, and just allow people to do their own thing, that builds a lot of cohesion within the community, right? We can do that also within the global community. We can allow countries to run their own course, do their own thing without interfering, and then we can build some sort of greater relationship with each other going forward. So often we elect leaders who are always trying to interfere with other people's affairs and they don't take care of their own backyard. And so, as Lao Tzu would say, and Zhuangzi would say, a proper leader takes care of their people, takes care of their own backyard, and allows other countries to run their own course and do their own thing and take care of themselves. And the only relationship you have with them is you're trying to build friendship with other communities, which is good for trade and so forth and so on, right? But you're not going over there telling them how to think and how to be, etc. You're taking care of your own backyard, your own people, because a country itself is kind of like a greater family, right? And so you're trying to take care of the entire national family and you're not worried about what is going on another country. Where you see some countries will spend so much money on foreign aid and weapons for other countries, etc., but they don't take care of their own backyard. They don't spend their money on their own citizens. And maybe that will change going forward, who knows? But that's part of the problem with the world, right? There's been leaders who have always focused on an expansionist mentality and expanding their influence. And this again is interference. And so if we peel those layers back and we follow the path of Wu Wei, imagine we follow the path of Wu Wei. We all have a commitment to non-interference. We just want to build friendships and relationships, no matter our cultural differences, no matter our nationalistic differences. We just want to build friendship and build better diplomacy going forward. Imagine what the world would be like. But instead, we've never done that. And like Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, the great Taoist masters, always said, no one's ever really followed the Taoist mentality. No one's ever followed Wu Wei on a collective level. We've had millions of people who have followed it on a personal level, and that's been an advantage for those people, but it's never been followed on more of a collective level. And to avoid something like World War III, if there was that commitment between nations to follow this path of non-interference, then we would have a completely different world. And so we would be coming to the table and trying to understand each other, trying to understand each other's differences. And if there is a beef, then that beef will be sorted out, but it won't be sorted out with weapons. It won't be sorted out with physical conflict. It'll be sorted out with better relations, better diplomacy, better ways of understanding each other. Even though you may have to hash it out and have an argument and this and that, that can be done by the leaders. That's why we have leaders, to do those sorts of things. It's not going to be resolved by having greater conflict, by throwing stones at each other. It's about following Wu Wei, the path of non-interference. Now, as I said, with Zhuangzi and Lao Tzu, they always said it was something that we've never followed. But for that to happen, we need to follow that also on a personal level. So if you want to change the macrocosm, it begins with the microcosm, right? This is a perspective in Taoism. The big picture and the small picture are the same picture. So it's up to you to make that decision to follow Wu Wei for yourself personally. And that may just affect your immediate environment, but it's still affected the immediate environment, right? And that can just filter out. It's not a project that's going to be done in one day, let's say, right? Unless we do have the leaders commit to this sort of philosophy and this spiritual teaching. But for ourselves on a personal level, it's important for us to follow and kind of lead by example, right? Most spiritual aspirants sometimes fall off the wagon and they forget about these fundamental basic teachings that kind of launch them onto the path. And so we kind of have to revert our gaze back towards these fundamental teachings such as Wu Wei so that we can allow the world to be as it will. And that brings a lot of peace not only to the people who you are leaving alone, but it also brings a lot of peace to yourself, right? That's how peace is inculcated within yourself and within the world, by leaving things alone. And if we all just learn to leave things alone by following the path of non-interference, Wu Wei, then we would have peace on earth in a very short span of time. Now, that's obviously not going to happen. We have to be realistic about that. So on a personal level, you have to commit to that type of spiritual practice. You have to lead the way as a spiritual aspirant, someone who's committed to the path. And then that will filter out and affect others. So in a nutshell, Wu Wei is a spiritual teaching that will allow us to avoid World War III. Only if we take it serious and only if certain leaders understand the benefit in not interfering with every little thing based on their own personal agenda. Now, I know some of you will say, yeah, but there's leaders out there who have already set things in motion and they didn't start from a place of Wu Wei. And look, that is true. But the nature of it is that the leader that sets these things in motion, or any leader that sets something in motion, say a violent act like war, for example, is coming from a place that's not Wu Wei. They're coming from interference. So how can we resolve interference with more interference? Interference can only be resolved with non-interference, right? With Wu Wei, with listening to people, with listening even to a leader who may be acting out of accord, but trying to understand their position and coming from a place of peace instead of hostility. And then we can begin to mend these illusionary boundaries that separate us as humans so that we can really have a true global community where we can listen to each other finally without our own personal agenda and just hear the country, the person, your neighbor, for example, from where they are in their life, from their station in life, without you imposing your own personal will and agenda upon them, because you are following sincerely the path of non-interference, Wu Wei. Shanti, shanti, shanti.